Hello, and welcome to New Videocast. I'm Leila Swan, and I lead communications here at New. Our guests today are David Vélez, founder and CEO of Nubank, and Roberto Campos, who is our vice chairman and global head of public policy. By way of a quick introduction, Roberto started his career in the private financial sector and then presided the Central Bank of Brazil between 2019 and 2024, where he oversaw the implementation of Open Finance and PIX, the instant payment systems. Welcome, Roberto, to New and to Videocast.
Thank you, Leila.
And David, welcome back to Videocast.
Thank you, Leila.
Let's get right into it. I think the decision to bring Roberto surprised many people in the market. I wanted you to tell us a little bit more about why you decided to make this move.
Sure, happy to. So I remember in 2013, when we were going around Sao Paulo, Faria Lima, talking to a bunch of people, figuring out, can we build a bank from scratch in Brazil at the time? One of the arguments that kept coming back again and again from all the experts in the industry was that the regulators would never let us. That this was a market that was dominated by 5 banks that own 85% of the market, that no entrepreneur can come in and compete, and that regulations was a barrier that was impossible to overcome. We went to Brasilia, we went to a central bank starting in 2013, and quickly realized that this argument actually didn't play out. That was actually not true. Mm-hmm. And what we found, even since the beginning of the company, was actually a regulator that had realized that Brazil was too concentrated, that Brazilians were paying too high fees and interest rates, and that there was lack of access, and that the market needed way much more competition. And through the years, as technology evolved, we had a relationship with different presidents of the central banks, and there was a lot of consistency in how the central bank was looking at competition and technology as a way to change the environment and open up more spaces for consumers. And so over the past 5 years, as we started, also Roberto came in as president of the central bank, and we went and started building a relationship, we realized that not only it was amazing how this financial infrastructure was being created and designed, how strategic it was, but I was personally very impressed in meeting Roberto and having conversations with him about the privacy concerns of layer 1 blockchains or having point of views around how to design the app and the user interface to make sure that PIX was going to be successful and banks were not going to be able to hide it. So I was personally very impressed to see not only the regulation, obviously, aspect of it, but also the knowledge and the strategy that the Brazilian central bank was having over the past 5 years, which ultimately led Roberto to be recognized several times as the top central banker in the world. So when Roberto finished his time at the central bank, I reached out to see what he was doing next. And for us, regulation, public policy, technology are key ingredients of being able to strengthen our presence in the countries, but also to scale globally. One of our biggest bets over the next 10 years is going to be internationalization. That's going to require a lot of interface with regulators around the world. And Brazil has become the future of financial services in the world. I don't think that people realize that Brazil today is the future of financial services. So in a way, we got to see a little bit of that. And in conversation with Roberto, we found that there was a match in terms of what he wanted to do next. And so we are super excited to welcome him as being part of the team and bring this very different perspective into what we do that ultimately allows us to execute our plan much better.
Fantastic. Yeah, Roberto. So I think we've always been impressed with the technical rigor, and I think all the awards that you and your team accumulated in the central bank are a testament to that. So what drove your decision to come back to the private sector and specifically to New?
Well, I was most of my life in the private sector, so I actually never thought I would work for the public sector ever, even coming from a family where my grandfather was in the public sector for a long time. He always told me, don't ever do that. He says it's too much stress and you're too smart for that. So he was always kind of warning us of, the problems and how hard it was to do things in the public space. But then I had the invitation. At the time, I started to look at how financial intermediation was actually being played out in different places. I had a vision that we could do something very different. At that time, I was working in the private sector and looking at innovation. I always loved innovation and disruption. I would go to Silicon Valley to, at the time, um, from time to Singularity University, all those symposiums that you had in Stanford, and what is the innovation? What can we do? Because one of the main things that was very interesting to me is that how can we democratize services? And technology was the only way, and is still the only way, to democratize financial services. And then when I looked at Nubank was doing something that was amazing. It was a small bank that got into Brazil in a very competitive landscape, that was a very early adopter of all the technologies. It was growing a lot without a lot of marketing. It was pretty much mouth to mouth. I was always very impressed on how companies can grow mouth to mouth because the users actually liked the experience, and I think that was something that I really liked. And the fact that one of the driving messages of the company is to empower people. I want to make people feel more present and more able to interact in the financial intermediation space.
That's great. So I think let's jump right in and talk about Pix, right? So in 5 years of implementation, I think it's fair to say it's the most successful instant payment system in the world, probably, right? And it's driving digitalization, it's driving inclusion. Can you both talk a little bit about, the journey and the impact of Pix in Brazil and what it meant for the company and how we're supporting that?
Sure. So we were already operating. We were trying to scale Nubank first with a credit card, then with a savings account, and then suddenly the Pix opportunity came up as a new piece of financial infrastructure. As Roberto was mentioning, one of our goals as a company has always been not only bring more competition, but with that competition and the cost structure benefit that our business model provides, allow us to get to the last customer, right? Brazil had over 60 million people that were completely left out. Latin America has 250 million people completely unbanked. And in this model that is digitally first allowed us to get to 100% of the population. When we saw what the central bank was trying to do on Pix, we thought, wow, the biggest bottleneck we have to grow is the offline economy and cash. I sometimes think about ourselves as a shark in digital waters. If we're forced to go in the offline world with cash, we're dead, or it's very hard for us to swim because we don't have branches. We have 120 million customers in Latin America. We have no money vault anywhere in our headquarters. There's not a single branch. There's not a single piece of paper anywhere. It's fully digitally. So Pix created the opportunity to digitalize the system, to remove cash, which meant for us an acceleration of our impact and accelerating into getting to more customers. And that's exactly what we did. We declared as a company goal when Pix came out as being the number one Pix wallet in the country. We rallied the troops, the entire company, into that goal. It was a OKR we had for a very long time, and we succeeded. Today, we are the largest wallet in Brazil. Between 25 to 30% of all the Pix transactions in the country go through Nubank. And we continuously invest in improving that user experience because we think payments is the most democratic financial services product, and is also the way that you bring people into a savings account, you create a relationship with them, and then it allows you to start building more cross-sell and other type of opportunities.
Roberto, did you think it was going to be so successful so fast? Can you tell us about the challenges?
Well, I think probably the first thing to say is that Pix was not an idea in isolation. Pix was part of a plan or an idea or a vision on how to make financial intermediation more inclusive, more competitive, and how can we do that in an environment of a country that has a population that still has a lot of financial needs. And then the first thing that came to our minds is, the first thing we need is engagement. You go out and you tell people a plan. If the plan is too complex, too hard to understand, you need to have engagement first. So if I told people from the very beginning, we're going to do a PIX and an open finance, then we're going to do a tokenization scheme in the economy, nobody would actually understand what that meant. So I said, okay, what is the most universal thing? Is payments. I looked at what the other central banks were doing, and a lot of central banks were saying we need better payment system. We looked at what India was doing with UPI at the time. And the idea was actually one afternoon walking with people in Singularity University. What should the characteristics of this be? And some people told me talk to gamers. They are the ones who are doing payments, digital payments right now. And I did. And there was 5 concepts that came out very clearly. People want something that would be cheap, fast, transparent, open, and secure. And that's what people are looking at. And so those are the foundations for PIX. We went there, and I went back. We talked to many people. We needed a system that was programmable, which is different from all the others, most of the others, because the plan at the end was to interact PIX with tokenization and open finance. So the rail of PIX would have a very important task in the future, because the connection between tokenization and open finance is very powerful when you have a rail that already works. So that's what were in our mind. PIX was a huge success we never imagined. So when we trying to see what are the number of transactions, because we're trying to see what kind of server we would need, and we didn't know. I remember the first week we said probably we're going to have 10 million transactions a day in 6 months or 1 year. That was like very fast. That went by in weeks. And today we have 250 million transactions a day. If you think that Brazil has a bancarized population of around 110, it's more than 2 transactions per bancarized person per day. That's like 2.5 times more than India, which is the system that is also very successful.
Yeah.
And we were able to get almost 40% of the cash transactions out of the market in this period. And I think build a system that is more inclusive, generated empowerment, because a lot of people who survive by selling things that are very cheap or very tickets that are very small, they were able to do it now. So there are a lot of millions of new business that were created, and we can see that in the explosion of the number of MEIs. And we also can see that we generated inclusion in a way that people are getting more used to being inside the financial sector. And at the end, I think PIX was a very good surprise for us, but it's just the beginning. I think if you had to ask me, from the view that I had in the middle of 2018 to what we have now, how much have we done in Brazil? I would probably say 30%.
We also see that PIX is in the center of an international dispute right now, but it really is what you said. It's a national treasure. It's ingrained in the Brazilian culture. We talk about PIX all the time. Is there any way to walk this back?
Well, I think PIX is very successful. I received messages of most of the central bankers when some of the articles were starting to appear saying, how can that be? I mean, the system works so well. It's been an inspiration for other countries in Latin America and in other places. We are talking about Mexico and what Mexico is trying to do. We are talking about the BREBI in Colombia. I was just the other day talking to the governor of South Korea, who is a good friend of mine. How can I accelerate the things that we have here?
Yeah.
And then one other thing that's very important is PIX is a public good. It wasn't created to kill competition, or it wasn't created for the central bank to become rich, because the central bank doesn't make any money. It wasn't created for the government to collect taxes. It was created to empower people. It was created so that the small guys that are selling things on the street could have a way to do it in a much more efficient way and in a safer way and in a more transparent way. So I think at the end it achieved a lot of its goals. It's being recognized as a good system. And I think this is probably some noise that we're seeing right now. And at the end, more and more people, even the ones that are criticizing PIX right now, they realize that PIX did a very important transformation for a country like Brazil.
We're in the Mexico office right now, and we've been spending a lot of time in Mexico and in Brazil. And Mexico hasn't cracked the real-time payment system. What do you think are the elements between success and failure? Why have some of these systems succeeded, like Brazil or India, and some of these systems haven't really cracked out? And what would be the advice to other regulators? Because there's so much value here for the economies. There is formalization, there is job creation, there is more competition, there is reduction in transaction costs. This is such a good thing for any country. Why wouldn't every regulator jump on this and make it successful?
Oh, I think you're a tech guy, so you know better than me. But ideas are much more easier to have than to implement. And you can have a good idea, but the tech solution and implementation is a different challenge. And a lot of countries, including Mexico, had an outline of the instant payment program before Brazil. Mm-hmm. But I think the reason why we were very successful is because we really worried about the details. Like you mentioned the app. We went into the app. We wanted the experience to be good for people using Pix. We wanted to be friendly. We wanted the key to be something that people could remember. We wanted the functionality of Pix to be able to expand. We wanted to have a database of the keys that could connect to your cell phone in a way that if you download it, you would recognize your contacts already. We wanted to have an experience in less clicks. I was all the time going to the apps of every bank and looking and trying. So I think what differentiates an idea that works from an idea that doesn't work is the user experience at the end. And I think we did that very carefully in Brazil.
Mm-hmm. And I think that talks to one of the things I was saying earlier. One of the first things Roberto did joining Nubank was telling us all the different things that were wrong with the app and finding all the different opportunities that we can improve. So I think that just talks to you being beyond a regulator and having this understanding of technology and product that ultimately becomes so important either to build consumer products or even government infrastructure.
Yeah, it has to have like the user experience to work,
And the
right?
funny thing is when you are on the other side and you build a system, you say, okay, I'm going to do this because the banks will do product A, B, and C. And you have such a clear view of the products that we imagine are going to be built by the banks. And then when they aren't, there is a bit of a frustration. But there are a lot of things that I imagine banks would build that are not still, they don't exist still. And I think there are a lot of opportunities on that. Mm-hmm. But when you are on the other side of the fence, you kind of imagine this path, and it doesn't happen the way you imagine.
I'm curious to hear about more on what you imagine would happen. But I think we have to say that Pix also created this new portfolio of solutions and even business models, right? Was there something that surprised you? And David, could you tell us about how we're invested in bringing new solutions into the Pix trails?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think first there is what the infrastructure enables and the user experiences that Pix enables. So obviously the real-time payments is free. That's the easy one. There's been a huge amount of savings of time and money for consumers. On top of that, you start using some of the programmability opportunity that Pix brings to do Pix Programado. We're adding also credit on top of Pix. So one of the most successful launches that we've had over the past 12 months have been Pix financing. You get to actually pay something in Pix, but then you get to pay it over a number of different installments. So that has been a phenomenal opportunity for consumers because it gives them a ton of control. Mm-hmm. And like that, we have one Pix payment where now customers get to, with one click, they get to bring cash from our bank account. And this is then what becomes really interesting, because then you start connecting Pix with our pieces of the infrastructure. As Roberto was saying, this is 30%. We haven't really talked about Open Finance, which is also pretty transformational infrastructure. Once you connect Open Finance, which means you connect all of our bank accounts with Nubank, and then you add Pix to this, you start grabbing payments directly from their different bank accounts. Yep. And then you can add tokenization to it, which is another wave of innovation. There is some data that they were looking at it, and fintech and financial services competition in Brazil. It's calculated more or less that over the 10 years, the percentage of lending from fintechs have gone from about 3% to 25% in Brazil. And that has immediately translated to over 300 basis points less in loans. So just more competition has translated effectively in lower interest rates for consumers. Open Finance could accelerate that additionally, because data ultimately is the big piece that any new entrant needs to be able to use to be able to lend. So I think it's a critical part of that puzzle. But also, I think it's a way to also push the envelope and how you play with these Lego pieces and reinvent the user experience for consumers, given the infrastructure what the infrastructure starts to enable.
And I always thought it would be a run to have a complete ecosystem at the end. I always thought if you have a marketplace and you create this environment in which people can be in one app and have access to all the data, to different products, different things, you are clearly a winner. I didn't know how that would take place. At some point in time, I thought the big tech companies would do that. Eventually, I thought, okay, this is going out to a different way, to ecosystems with different things. Then logistics become very relevant in building the ecosystem because of the online retail. So I don't know where this is going to go now. I think we are all looking and trying to understand how it's going to evolve. But I think at the end, it's going to be a run for that place in which you have something, an environment that your client goes into, and he has everything, or he has most of the things. And part of the reason why I wanted to join Nu is because I thought Nubank was very well positioned for that run, for that race that I think is starting to, be more apparent.
Yeah, and Davi was mentioning what we saw in Brazil is what we're calling the future of financial services. So I'm curious to hear what both of you think. Is innovation going to be born in the global south in the world? What have you been looking at as we compare to the developing world?
I think Brazil is clearly a leader. There are some other places that are doing very interesting stuff. And innovation is always a bit segmented. You have some ideas, and at the end, if you create a system that is flexible and open, you can adapt and you can actually add innovation from other places. I think South Korea is doing interesting stuff. I think Singapore, under the management of Javi Menon, was doing a lot of interesting things. The environment of central bank is through the Innovation Hub, which is an innovation hub that is below the BIS, that was actually created by Agustin. And I think it fostered a lot of conversation and innovation. But Brazil was always, I think, seen as the leader or one of the leaders in this movement. So I think yes, it could be that it's something, and remember that for emerging market countries, you have more to gain.
That's it.
Because the power of democratizing financial intermediation is much bigger in an emerging market country than in a developed economy where you have all the population that is already bankerized and most of people already have a way of doing instant payments. So I think it goes hand in hand.
The need creates the opportunity sometimes. Davi,
The other thing I was going to add is if you look at the biggest technology companies in the world created over the past 20, 30 years, a lot of them, the big majority of them have come out of the US. They have not come out of the global south, they have come out of the US. And why is that? It's because they have been trying to solve problems that are global in nature. And obviously the US has a lot of the capabilities and technology and talent to be able to reinvent, to take people to Mars or reinvent the rockets. But the leading technology company in financial services is unlikely to come out of the US because the initial problem wasn't apparent necessarily there. So that was not necessarily the problem that the entrepreneur wanted to solve. But when you go to Brazil, the pain there was 10x bigger. And so in countries like Brazil, if you have a conjunction of factors from a consumer pain that is big, but also a regulator that enables that innovation, and you have capital and you have entrepreneurship and you have access to data, if those stars align, then you might actually build one of the leading technology companies in that space. And that's why Nubank today globally is one of the leading digital banks in the Western world that came out of the global south. So I think it depends on the industry, and the consumer pains. It is possible that the future leading healthcare company in the world might come out of the global south because the pain felt in the global south on healthcare is gigantic, is much larger than in a lot of developed economies. And what AI has done is democratizing access to that knowledge, right? Expertise becomes a little bit of democratized. So I think there are in certain aspects, we should expect to see the leading new tech companies coming out of countries like Brazil, but it does require an alignment of factors that in financial services here existed, in other sectors might or might not exist.
That makes sense. And that's a perfect segue for my next question. What do you guys think is the next frontier to be disrupted or to be innovated in financial services?
So I think that there is a number of different angles to the question. I think the one that we are very excited about and we've talked publicly is we think digital banking enabled inclusion because our cost structure advantage and the efficiency on the model allowed us to get to 100% of the population. But digital banking did not solve advice, did not solve, you call it financial education. You might today, if you're in areas of the country that has a lot of poverty, you will have an account today to do PICs. Yeah. But if you get 1,000 reais, you probably will not know how to invest effectively. You will not have the negotiating leverage to go and get 10 banks to compete for a loan to you and give you the very best loan. You might not necessarily know what is the best tax efficient mutual fund to invest your money. All of that knowledge is today still really depends on a small percentage of the population. Yeah. And that's the concept that AI can finally provide. Is not only if digital banking democratized access to financial services, AI can democratize financial knowledge and investing. And so we're very excited about that. And it's a tough problem. It requires a lot of investment from that perspective, but we think we are very well positioned to be able to help consumers more and more do more with their money and optimize their life monies with that.
I think is registration of financial and physical assets. I think this needs to be disrupted. If you think about, and I'm talking more about emerging market countries, in Brazil it's apparent, it's obvious that you still have to go to a cartório to register your house, and that you have to go back there every time you do a transaction in the bank. If you think that we're going to this tokenization space, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to implement a tokenization phase for the process, you have to think about an environment in which once the asset is in a blockchain, it becomes automatically divisible, verifiable. It's eligible for multiple transactions as collateral. You have atomized settlement. So I think the next thing that needs to be disrupted is it's in this day and age, it's not acceptable the amount of money that we pay and the friction that it generates to have to register everything in the way we do.
And what's the timeline you think for a tokenization?
That would come with Drex and the project of tokenization the economy. And I think it's already happening to some extent with a lot of the projects of innovation that I'm seeing. And there are new rules that are actually making that easier to do. For example, in the case of real estate, we just have at the beginning of July the new norm that allows for a real estate loan to have divisibility so that you can use it more than once for collateral. So there are a lot of new things that are coming that will enable this solution. But I think that this needs to be disrupted.
I think the other aspect of that is super interesting is when you combine that tokenization wave and you think about it from an international perspective, the fact that a Japanese retail investor will now be able to buy a piece of a Brazilian startup, right? An American investor will be able to buy a piece of credit card loan in Brazil. How capital markets are going to be reinvented globally through the tokenization waves.
Even the wholesale market, because think that today when you do an IPO, you have this thing called roadshow. So you get a lot of people on the plane and you go.
We remember
that won't make a lot of sense, right? Yeah. Because you have an asset that is divisible, it's very transparent. You can do multiple presentations, you can do atomized settlement. So I think this world is becoming more and more connected. Tokenization is, I think, the real instrument that will allow that to happen. But the governments need to have a holistic view on the tokenization process. Because if you have a tokenization that is very fragmented, I'm not so sure that you're going to end up with the best results. So I think you need an aspect of competition, innovation from the private sector, but you need also some kind of guardrails to make sure that this ends up being a system that will communicate. And I think this is being built already on the blockchain.
What are the risks if these guardrails aren't in place?
Well, the risk usually is that you end up with a system that is very fragmented. So you have a lot of microsystems that are very efficient digitally,
Yeah.
but they don't connect. Or you end up in a system that you create leverage that at some point in time can harm the stability of the financial system. And another danger is that you start creating a system that is it's so opaque, that has so little transparency, that people begin to have a mistrust, and then everything falls.
Davi, how is New getting ready for this new evolution, and integration of these blockchain rails at a global level?
Yeah, at a very high level, going back a bit, something I said initially, we feel in a very fortunate position having been born in Brazil, because we think we have seen the future of financial services in the world. We are living in the future. And we think the world's payments system will look like Pix. That is the bet. That is the view.
Yeah.
And so, given that, then the question is like, what are the rails? What is the infrastructure that's going to enable the creation of a global Pix infrastructure ecosystem? Stable coins seem to be part of the solution. I mean, I think we're very much investing in the area. We like Bitcoin a lot from a number of different angles, and all the layering solutions that Bitcoin is enabling. So we are thinking very deeply about how to create this infrastructure, how to participate of this opportunity. But ultimately, this is going to be a great opportunity for Brazil, for Latin America, for Nubank, and for really to interconnect together with the world.
Well, we talked a little bit about AI and large language models. What do you see is going to be the paradigm shift in integrating this technology in financial services?
Well, I think if you ask me what I think the trends are for the future, I think the two pillars are tokenization and artificial intelligence. Like when I thought about the marketplaces, that I think I saw the path, but I didn't kind of see the way to get there. It's the same here. I know that we're going to have a huge interaction between tokenization and all this artificial intelligence process. I think it's going to generate segmentation in the market. I think it's going to generate financial inclusion even more. I think it's going to generate efficiency, because today the number of people who consume bad financial products and take bad financial decisions, I think we can fix part of that with AI, and in that way is a very powerful tool. And I think we are in this run to have the best agent AI. We are seeing that in different dimensions.
Yeah, Davi, you talk a lot about the rate of transformation, how quickly things are evolving. What do you think we might see in 5 or 10 years?
Well, it's hard to forecast when the speed of transformation is so fast. And I think, especially with AI side technology, that every statement that you make about it, you have to put a footnote to say to be rediscussed 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
It's not a year from now. It's to be rediscussed 2 weeks from now. Every time you say the model doesn't do this, you gotta rediscuss. You gotta remember to discuss it a month from now.
There's an update now. Yeah,
exactly. There's an update, and then you're already wrong. So you have to refresh your point of view about this technology consistently.
Yeah.
I think for us, I think what we're really excited is democratizing that access to that financial advice. If you think about the concept of the person that's earning 1,000 reais per month, $200 per month, and that is saving $1,000 a year, is gonna be able to get the same financial advice and the same access to financial products than the richest person in the world. That's mind blowing. I mean, that's completely transformational, because right now we're in a system where the wealthier you are, the more access you have, and the poorer that you are, the less access you do. So there is a lot of inequality and compounded inequality that comes out of that. If the wealthier people continuously make good decisions, and the people that have less access continuously make worse decisions. So if you're able to close that gap, and as a citizen of any country, you're able to delegate your financial life to somebody that has given advice to 500 million people around the world, and that has seen every single possible scenario and that have access to every single possible, that's incredibly powerful. So the potential of wealth creation that could generate for the world and for everybody is gigantic. So we're just very excited about the possibilities that could enable.
Yeah, I'm definitely an enthusiast and an optimist as well. So, Roberto, what do you think are the main, fiscal challenges in the world today, and how is Brazil moving in that space?
Well, Leila, I think the most challenge today, we talk a lot about tariffs and we talk about the polarization, and people always ask, what is the big elephant in the room? I don't think the elephant in the room right now, if you think medium term, is tariffs or whether it's polarized or not. I think we have to understand that we came out of the pandemic with a process in which we increased a lot the debt, the global debt. We increased the global debt by around 17%. And the problem is the way we increased the debt is we created a lot of these transfer programs, which were very needed. Now we are coming out of the pandemic now, 2 years out, and we only reversed a very small part of these programs. And because these programs put a lot of money in the economy, and remember, it was the biggest coordination that we have between monetary policy and fiscal policy in the history. We not only spent 17% of GDP collectively in less than a year and a half, but we also brought interest rates to close to zero in most of the places. Even places that had very high rate like Brazil, interest rate went lower, and interest rate were lowered a lot. So the post effect of that is we have a lot of liquidity to go around, and there is a sensation that markets are fine and everything's fine because you have a lot of liquidity. But I think we need to keep the eye on the bigger problem, which is we have a lot of debt. We created a lot of transfer programs, and because interest rates are higher, because these programs and this liquidity created inflation, and because the liquidity is here, the inflation is not going to go lower anytime soon. Basically, we have a higher debt with higher inflation, which means higher debt with higher interest rates, which means higher cost of rolling the debt, which means less money to do a lot of the expenditures that a lot of the governments have to do in terms of the discretionary spending. And the way governments are trying to fix that is to tax more people. And it's not only taxing people, but the way the governments are taxing people. The way the government is taxing, I cannot tax labor, I cannot tax the labor component of the productivity because we just came out of a pandemic. So let's tax capital. And the problem when you do that is you create less and less efficiency. Because in a productive environment, if I have to pay more for capital than I have to pay for labor, I will try to produce something with more units of labor and less of capital. And that's the definition of lower productivity. So we're coming out of this problem in an environment that we have a lot of debt, and emerging market countries, this is very true. And if we go into Brazil, this story plays out perfectly in Brazil. And we need to understand that the way out of this is not to public government and more debt. It's to stimulating the private government, diminishing the bureaucracy, trying to bring investment. So what I think the message is that I think the world is at a crossroads right now. We need to understand that we need to address the debt issue. A lot of countries are not being able to address that. You have very few countries that are actually producing primary surplus today. And I think this can be a huge problem in the future. And the sooner you try to fix it, the less costly it is in terms of harm that you create in the social tissue.
Yeah, Roberto, I think we see a lot of governments putting pressure on central banks, just saying, cut the interest rates, cut the interest rates. And I hear you saying they need to work a little bit better together to break a cycle, right?
Yeah, one of the problems is the coordination going into the pandemic was great. It was very easy. You lower interest rates, the government can spend more. It's always easier to spend more. Usually the Congress likes it, the government likes it, people are receiving transfer, they like it. So the coordination going in was very easy. But then you have the secondary effect, which inflation was going higher. And at some point in time, you don't need that much transfer anymore. The coordination going out was very difficult because then you start to have a process in which the central banks are going one way, but the governments are not aligned. The other side, the fiscal was not aligned. So you had this break in the synchronicity between fiscal policy and monetary policy. And we see that in a lot of different places today. And this is a challenge for the central banker, because at the end, the central banker will be blamed because, see, your mission is to control prices, but inflation is going high.
I think the other aspect of that is interesting is that a lot of those regulations, either specifically around tax, are designed as if capital and labor and talent was trapped in a country, when in reality, increasingly, capital, labor, and talent is movable across countries. There is a competition also happening across countries to whoever provides the best quality of life, the best competitive environments, the best situations for capital, for talent, for labor. So these decisions are made almost in isolation of what's happening all around the world. And ultimately, that's why they end up generating the opposite effect that they were designed to do to begin with.
But the reality is, I looked at the post-pandemic, all the initiatives that existed to balance budgets. 92% of it was increasing taxes, and only 8% of it was decreasing expenditures. So, I mean, this tells us that overall we need to understand that this is a problem going forward.
David, do you see that there's a lot of work for governments to work with companies in the scenario of the global interconnectedness to create a better environment locally, or is it more of a us against them attitude sometimes?
I mean, I think I see the same division that Roberto is mentioning. I think there are there's some interface with governments where the innate response is don't even come in, don't even try. Like doors are shut. And there's some other set of countries that say, please come and what do you need, right? There was I remember always this viral tweet from the mayor of Miami who said, how can we help? And put out a banner in California saying, how can we help? And that message just attracted so much capital and people to Florida, right? So it is odd that governments wouldn't use that entire attitude. You know, it's almost from our perspective, we want to make their customers love them fanatically. If you're trying to attract the best talent, if you're trying to invest the best capital, there's competition out there, and clearly your country benefits from attracting a lot of this talent. Look at the AI talent, right? There's a lot of news around what AI talent is being paid for because of this incredible productivity that's generating. If I was running in a country around the world, I would want the talent here. And that means lower taxes. That doesn't mean higher taxes.
But we're coming at time. I wanted to ask a quick fire round question. If there was one thing you could fix in financial services this year, what would it be?
For me, it's easy. Financial education, I think, is the most important thing.
As we think about internationalizing, if there were ways to find licensing arrangement across the world that would enable more entry for different regulated entities into more countries, that would be amazing, because that would add so much more competition to financial services around the world. I understand the point about stability, so that's that's probably the biggest downside to that. But financial services should become very homogeneous globally, and right now it's very isolated, and the best ideas don't flow from country to country. So everybody's trying to reinvent the wheel, right? Every regulator is almost like trying to reinvent the wheel on payments.
Yeah.
You mentioned at one point that Brazil would open source Pix for any country.
We did, yeah.
And you did.
Yeah.
More of that. The best ideas open source in financial services. That has so much impact for any country, any citizen, in terms of innovation.
Yeah, I love that. Disrupt, but with stability.
Yeah.
That's great. I want to thank you both for your time. This was a great conversation, and I want to thank our listeners as well for staying with us till the end.
So thank you, Leila. Thank you, David. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you.